Hey, today I just wanted to give a really quick overview of CamillaDSP and how I'm using it in my system to provide crossovers for my active JBL M2 speakers. Now, I've had these speakers for about a year and super happy with them. I've tried a number of different software implementations of crossovers. It started off with some quite high-end commercial DSP amplifiers, which, were very easy to set up and configure, but weren't really delivering the sound quality that I wanted. The other main drawback was they were super noisy with their fans, but they did have some pros like power, and they definitely high current. The other benefit was they enabled me to play with Dante and AES-67, which is a fantastic sounding standard, definitely a step above USB in my opinion. But overall, the amplifier setup did not stay. I transitioned to using Roon and its convolution engine to deliver crossovers for my system. And I used that setup for about a year, which consisted of, and still does consist of, a Raspberry Pi 4, which feeds via an AudioQuest Carbon to the Intoner galvanic isolator. That comes out of there via another AudioQuest Carbon to my M2 DAC, and my M2 DAC and Raspberry Pi are powered by a dual linear power supply. The M2 feeds two NAD 298 amplifiers, which run Purify modules. The amps are set up in low gain, and I'm using the higher voltage of the M2 to provide pretty high input voltage. Over here we have a PC monitor with a Chromecast taking Roon output, and I've got a Roon NUC in another room just feeding the music streaming. So at the moment all my streaming comes from Roon, but I wanted the ability to use additional inputs on the M2 DAC, namely SPDIF, Toslink and analog, to provide additional input support for the system. So one of the drawbacks of using Roon was the fact that I was locked into USB only and a stream from Roon only. So CamillaDSP has effectively made it possible for me to access all the other inputs within the DAC with a very quick switch. So that's what we're here to talk about. And I'm just going to start my music from my Roon server. That's set up to provide all source to be resampled to 96 kilohertz. And that's outputting to my Raspberry Pi, which is running the Roon bridge with CamillaDSP software and also an ALSA loopback, which you can see there. That ALSA loopback catches the Roon stream and sends it in to my CamillaDSP, which we can see here in real time with the signal levels. Now, Camilla, once installed, is fully accessible from a WebSocket, so it's really super easy to access and to make changes on the fly. Now, if you want more information about CamillaDSP, I would head over to GitHub. It's got a fantastic overview of the software, what it can do, how to implement it, how to configure it, and it basically gives an overview of all the different parameters that you can change within the software. So it's super detailed, not so easy to implement, even though it's compatible with most OSs, Windows, Linux, and Mac OS. It's not an easy feat. So I headed over to a link on Audio Science Review, which was provided by this gentleman here, and that allowed me to create a Raspberry Pi 4 with CamillaDSP to provide all the equalization and crossover duties for my speakers. So this guide provides a step-by-step overview of how to implement the DSP onto the Raspberry Pi. So if you follow this verbatim, it's impossible to go wrong. And it took me maybe an hour by the time Ubuntu installed and we went through this process. So after that, we were ready to go. So for the cost of a Raspberry Pi 4 and your USB interface, the software comes free, and you basically have what is considerably, probably a much more powerful unit than you'd be able to buy off the shelf from the likes of Mini DSP, etc. So what we can see here is the loopback coming in to CamillaDSP. You do have the ability to volume control here, but I've disabled that for my system. I do all my volume control through Roon. So if I go back here and just mute this Roon system down and go back into CamillaDSP, you can see here I've got left and right coming in, and then I've got multiple outputs. Now, I'm not using all those outputs. I'm only using 4 of them. So because I'm using a two-way, or I'm implementing a two-way crossover. So you can see there, I've got my 2 woofers on channel 1 and 2, and I've got my compression drivers on 3 and 4. Every other channel is muted down. We get some other information here about the state of the DSP, its capture and sample rate, and whether we're using rate adjust, any clip samples, and the buffer. Now, you do actually have a log here, and it can keep a log of all the activity. You can turn that off if you want. And then it basically tells you what config is currently applied and running. Now, so if we go to devices, which is the first tab, you set your sample rate. So that's the sample rate of basically capture and output. In my case, I've set that to 96K. You can set your buffer size. You can set a threshold of silence. So if the system is not receiving any signal, it will mute down after a period of whatever you put here. So in my case, 5 seconds. You can set rate adjust. You can set resampling if required. There is also the ability to set a number of different resampler types, which is great. And then you've got your capture device. In my case, I'm capturing 2 channels with ELSA, doing the loopback device, and the playback device is my M2 Mark V with 18 channels of output. The next tab is the filter tab. Now the filter tab is where you import or put, you apply the filters that you're going to make accessible to the pipeline. So in my case, I've brought in 4 different filters. So I've got convolution high, which is basically crossover for the compression driver. Then I've got convolution low, which is crossover for the woofer. I've got room correction left and room correction right. Now, all my convolution filters are loaded as WAV files, but you can add a lot of different other filters. So for instance, you can add all these different types here. So you've got biquads, convolution, delays, gains, volume. There's got an adjustable loudness curve, sort of mimicking the RME ADI loudness curve. And then you can do IIR, diff, EQ, and differ. So lots of different selections there, but in my case, I'm only using 4 filters. Now the next tab along is the mixer, and in my M2 requires a pre-configured setup and for it to work, and it has to display all the channels. Now the software is smart enough to know that if a channel does not have pipeline applied, it doesn't use any processing. So like many of these softwares, you need to start working from channel destination 0 through. So destination 0 is really output 1 on my DAC, and then so on and so forth. So I've got output 1 is using source 0, which is channel left, and I've got destination 1, which is my DAC output 2, and that's using channel right, and so on and so forth. So woofer, woofer, compression, compression. So left, right, and they're all set at a -3 gain, just to provide some level of digital headroom. This is not a floating DSP, so you have to control your own headroom. Now you have the ability over here to invert channel if you need to for crossover. You can mute and delete. Now that goes on and on for my list. So you can see here that I've got, well, that says 17, so I've got 18 channels of potential output. And then in the pipeline, which is the next tab along, what we need to do is start, I'm just going to mute the music down. what we need to do is start applying the filters to each channel. So here we go. We've got channel 0, so that's left woofer. That's applied convolution crossover low and room correction left. Then, of course, we go to the next woofer, which is convolution low and room correction right. Then we've got compression crossover, so convolution high, and we've got room correction left, and the last one is convolution high, room correction right. So that's how I've configured my system to operate. Obviously, that can be up to the user. Now, you have this really nice ability to see the filter. You can look at the phase, the gain, and group delay, which is kind of cool. So I'll just give you another look. So that's my high, or my compression convolution crossover. So that's some nice information. And then at the bottom of this pipeline, you can see I've got a lot of unused channels here. But at the bottom of the pipeline, you get a visual representation of what's happening. So channel left and right coming into the 4 outputs on my M2. So I got convolution low, convolution low, high, and high, and they're going through the pipeline. So all these other channels don't take up any processing, which is fantastic. And that's the pipeline. And then over here, we've got files. So under files, that's where you load in and you save your configs. These configs can be used as sort of input selections on the USB interface. So I'll run through that in a second, but effectively they become immediate switches for input. So that provides me the ability to utilize analog toslink or USB. I've got to add SPDIF yet. And that makes it really super easy to switch between the inputs on the interface. And just below it, we've got the filters. So you can pull in any number of save filters and apply them back into the filter section, and then you can apply them into the pipeline against each channel. So that's effectively it in terms of the software. Now, if I just click over to shortcuts here, you can see that I've got a quick config switch. So I can click here, and now I'm using the analog input on my DAC and back to the USB and Toslink and so on and so forth. So this DSP platform actually gives you the ability to put the Raspberry Pi into like a flirt case and use an IR receiver, and you can actually use the system as a full preamp. So now if I just restart up my music, go back here in Roon, hit play. So you can see Roon again, it's just resampling everything to 96K. I go out of here, back to Camilla, and we have real-time signal feedback. So that's it in terms of today's overview. But yeah, I just thought this was a really super useful overview to give people an idea of how powerful CamillaDSP is and how I use it in my system with my JBL M2's. Cheers.